economics or regular economics, and I'm here to talk about the 10-year anniversary. All right, I don't like to say anniversary on something that was bad, but basically 2008 was a huge recession in the United States around the world economically. There was a huge stock market crash, and investment banks went under, and insurance companies struggled, and there was bailouts. There was a little bit of everything going on. Some people will argue who's really at fault and who's not, but really the beginning aspect of it was the housing crisis, and that came from a lot of people will blame the Affordable Housing Act, and basically what that did is it allowed more and more people to get access to mortgages, and what we saw was housing companies basically giving out mortgages to people basically who couldn't afford it. And what happened was we saw things like subprime mortgages, high interest rates, all sorts of things, low down payments, and basically people couldn't afford those mortgages down the road. At the time they thought they could, because if a bank says you can afford it, people took it. Unfortunately, over time, as we got into the mid-2000s, 2007, 2008, a lot of people started foreclosing on houses because they could not afford those houses, even though they were trying to get other loans to help them out. It didn't happen. So that created kind of the next effect. And the next effect really was felt by the investment banks. The huge, the Citibanks of the world, and the Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs and whoever else, because they, during that time, started purchasing what were called mortgage-backed securities. And what they were a sort of stock or bond that basically bundled tons of mortgages into one investment piece, one kind of stock. And what happened was once all of the mortgages started going under, then these were affected. These investments now were no good. So we saw panic in the banks. We saw Bear Stearns go under or bailed out by the government, given a partner, and then eventually we saw Lehman Brothers, the most famous bank basically, to go bankrupt, to basically get absolved. And it didn't stop at the investment banks. It also went into the insurance companies. The most famous was AIG, who were writing insurance in case these mortgage-backed securities failed. And when so many of them failed at once, then they were left with no money. All right, and then what we saw was all of these things affect everybody. Insurance affects everybody. All right, and investment banks affect a lot of parts of the economy. And so all three of these things kind of happened, domino effects, created a terrible crisis here in the United States. Attempts were made for government bailouts after that, which again were controversial because they bailed out some of the mortgage companies. Some of the banks, they helped a little bit, and then a lot later on, they had to bail out AIG, but then they also did not bail out certain companies. At the same time, it's taxpayers' money, it's heavy risk, and people, like I said, don't like to see basically rich investment banks or rich insurance companies make mistakes and then be able to be bailed out and survive. And so all of these things that were happening in September of 2008 also seeped into a worldwide impact, because these companies we're talking about are international companies. They're dealing with things in Europe and Asia and Australia and wherever else. So if they were hurting, eventually it also leaked into the world in other areas, not just the United States. Basically what we saw panic. All right, we see perception of the economy is really just as important as reality of the economy. When people see that the economy is doing poorly, people panic, take their money out. It makes all of these things even worse. We take money out of the banks, all right, the banks get nervous, they shut things down, and so what we saw was a lot of unemployment, we saw a lot of cutbacks, we saw some people getting bailouts, some people not, and so it took a lot of time to unravel. A lot of people lost a lot of money, whether it's in their savings accounts or in their retirement funds, or in many cases their jobs, and it took a while the economy did slowly recover, but